member of the team to talk today, and my part of the project is to focus on the ethnographic part of the work. So finding out from a range of people, heritage managers, museum visitors, all sorts of people, about their relationships with the past. So today, given that we've got a short length of time, I'm just going to focus on one group in particular, a group that I think is quite important, as you say, and that we've already talked about where ideas emerge from, and I think one place they do emerge is in childhood, so that's what my focus is today. So why children? Well, the under-15s are quite a significant proportion of visitors, and a really key audience for the heritage sector. So visitors to open-air museums and museums, and also, as Richard's already mentioned, since 2013 there have been some really major changes in the way history is taught in primary schools in Britain. So now seems like a good time to take a look at that and see how both teachers and heritage managers have responded to that. But maybe more fundamentally, I think the messages we receive about the past when we're really young can be extremely powerful in shaping our understanding. And I think even as we learn more and grow older and refine our views, we still have those very early impressions. So I think while we're thinking about how grown-ups engage with the past, it's really important to understand maybe how as kids, the sort of messages that the kids are getting very early on. And just to get in the spirit of it, I'm sharing with you my own early encounter with the past, with the Iron Age, and this image dates to the 1970s. So I hope you like my Iron Age roundhouse.
We like this sound.
So, and I came across this quote. You may be familiar with Hilary Mantel, a writer of historical fiction. She presented a series of lectures for the BBC quite recently, and these comments from those lectures just struck me as quite useful. When I was a child, the past felt close and it felt personal. And Richard's already mentioned that some of his students are very attached to the history that they learn before they come to university. And again, readers are touchingly loyal to the first history they learn. And if you challenge it, it's as if you're taking away their childhoods. So I think to keep that in mind, and I just included a picture of Rudyard Kipling, Pepper Pook's Hill, which may be some people's childhood memories of history, but I know it's one of Richard's.
Honest resistant.
So as you've heard, we're in the first year of the project at the moment, and the fieldwork I just started really this summer. So at the moment I've had several visits to museums, both local and national. I've spent a couple of weeks at Roman Vindolanda, which is an open-air museum near to Hadrian's Wall. And next week I'm off to the Scottish Crannog Centre to find out more about Iron Age. I've also talked to various education officers. I've observed a few school visits, both at the Open Air Museum and at a local, at the Durham Museum Service. And I've done a brief survey of families visiting Vindolanda. So I'll just share some of that with you today. Just to recap some of the areas of interest that the project has, and these I share with the digital side of the project. So we're interested in both formal and less formal exposures and relationships with the past, and particularly in terms of children, obviously from this perspective. And in terms of children also, I'm quite interested in how narratives can be oversimplified when they're presented to children, and the danger of creating stereotypes and the sort of insistent dualities that Richard was talking about. Richard and Chiara have both mentioned place and identity, and again I think this is important in the way we present the past to children in different parts of Britain. There are different national curriculum for Scotland, Wales and England, and very, very big differences across Britain in the way the past is presented. And also in terms of children as well, the way the past is recreated and reinvented both by children and for children is something that I'd be quite interested in. So, beginning with the formal end of the spectrum and the national curriculum in Britain, Rich has already mentioned that this changed in 2013, but they've been going back in time. There have been a lot of changes over the last 40 years, which I'll touch on. So different generations are probably getting a very different picture of history through their school teaching. And as I've said, there's huge differences between England, Scotland and Wales, which reflect the national priorities and identities. So does it matter where you grew up as to what your relationship with the past is? So just to look, I haven't got time to go through the Welsh, the Scottish and the English, but just to look at the English national curriculum, because that's where most of the ethnography that I've done so far is based, to give you an idea of the history. So before 1988, in my day, there was no curriculum, so it was really up to the teachers and the school to decide what was taught at this stage. So there's a bit of a question mark on what that generation actually learned about. I was very lucky. I managed to get a whole term on the Iron Age and a whole term on the Romans at about age 8. So then in 1988, a new curriculum was introduced, but as Richard mentioned, it started with the Roman invasion. Prehistory just wasn't there at all. Since 2013, prehistory was introduced at Key Stage 2, which in Britain is 7 to 11. But as Richard's already mentioned, the emphasis remained on invasion, resistance and Romanisation. I think you have to do that, don't you, when you say Romanisation? But to look in more detail, this is how it's set out. So you can see that the Iron Age is just one bullet within the bigger topic of prehistory, and then there's a whole topic of the Roman Empire and its impact on Britain. So, in effect, actually I should have said with the prehistory, because it's taught chronologically, prehistory is taught to the youngest of that age group. So they move through to the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, it obviously retains its importance compared to pre-2013, and teachers were really quite concerned when prehistory was introduced because they hadn't been taught it themselves. So they're not very confident in teaching it. And there was a great demand, and remains a great demand, for resources and support to help the teachers with the prehistory. And all sorts of educational organisations and heritage organisations responded with material, including lesson plans such as the ones that are illustrated here, and a range of education packs and collections of images for teachers to use. So looking at the heritage sector support, it was already providing support for teaching of Romans, but they had to really up their game and include prehistory. And now available are school visits to sites and museums, classroom workshops. I've attended one of those, handling sessions and object packs that schools can borrow on loan. The British Museum now offer a very innovative virtual learning option, so they can reach schools beyond the immediate London area. And to give you a detailed example, the Durham University Museum Service now reach over 20,000 school children every year. Another 10,000 if you include the additional public events that they do. They also have a Young Explorers Club, Young Durham Archaeology Explorers, and an incredible dedicated learning centre. So I spent a day there with 67-year-olds learning about prehistory, which was great fun. I'll quickly move on. So school isn't the only place where children learn about the past. As I said, they're a significant part of the audience for sites and museums. And this gives them and I think this is more about entertainment. It's usually a family day out rather than a learning experience, but it gives them more of a connection to real places, often local places, and they get a chance to dress up and take part in activities, and it's a different kind of engagement with the past, less formal and perhaps more personal than when they're with a school group. And as I've mentioned, there's a whole range of site types across Britain. So it's not just England, Scotland and Wales, but within England itself. So you get a lot of villas, for example, in the south of England, whereas we've got all the Hadrian's Walls legionary forts in the north of England. So different children in different parts of the country, of England, are experiencing the past in very different ways. Just to look at one of the insistent dualities that Richard was mentioning, these are both taken from Roman open-air museums. Well, one museum and one open-air museum. On the right there, this is a new exhibition opened specifically for children quite recently, which I think is really rather good. And we're introduced to Alba, whose mother is a local Brigantian. Her father was a soldier from Gaul who has now become a cobbler and settled in Vindolanda. And I think this nice messy representation of the past is very different and contrasts markedly with on the other side of the slide, which is a nearby museum run by the same people, where children can sit in a Roman classroom and have a lesson in citizenship, which really emphasises the difference between the very civilised Roman school children and their illiterate neighbours down the road. So, of course, moving further down the less formal end of the spectrum, there are so many ways that children are exposed to different versions of the past, varying from the factual to the faintly ridiculous, quite honestly. I think I particularly like the title Romans versus Dinosaurs on Mars, which raises a few question marks. But so I'm sort of trying to look at a variety of these sources and just see what sort of contradictions are raised by these, what sort of stereotypes are presented, and what messages children might be picking up. So I think sometimes the boundaries between fact and fiction can be 3 minutes, can be quite blurred. So I'll move on very, very quickly. So another side of this discussion is games and models. So I think it's quite interesting to see what children create out of their own imagination, and what as well as the games that are made for them, the creative opportunities that some of these games have for children. Now I'm going to move on quite quickly because I thought I'd get this cartoon in, seeing as it was mentioned earlier. So I won't dwell on it. But this is the fiercely debated cartoon, which was intended for children, but has created a bit of Twitter war. So I think we've already talked about that. So I'll move quickly over that and get to the bit that I wanted to talk about really. I did a brief survey at Vindolanda where I asked everybody visiting to take a Roman writing tablet, which in this case was a wooden lolly stick, and asked them to take that with them on their visit and put on it 3 words to describe the Romans, based on what they experienced on the visit. And I ended up with, let me just check my numbers, 252 words, most of which I was able to put into these categories. I don't know if you can see that from there, but so just to run through, you can see I've got negative terms I categorised all together, and then sort of positive terms like diverse, resilient, industrious, creative, intelligent, and then there was a big focus on military might. But as you can see, I've split it into under 15s and over 15s just to see if there was a difference, and I think hopefully you can see from that the under 15s are focusing on the military side of things, but also on intelligence and on the negatives. So they seem to be quite aware of some of the negative terms like ruthless and cruel were some of the terms that were used. Whereas the older folk focused on organisation and practical skills and creativity. So a slightly different skew. So what that's telling us, I'm not sure, this is quite new data that I've got, so I haven't really had a chance to work it through. But so thinking about the Iron Age versus Roman ideas that we were talking about before, Richard's already mentioned a few of these, but one thing I would say is that what I've seen so far is a difference between the active Romans and the more passive Iron Age. We're coming through in the open-air museum. So the Iron Age, we've got the crafty Celts building roundhouses and other little bits and pieces, whereas the Roman sites, it's all about being drilled and being a military machine. And there's very little space for subtlety, either geographical or chronological. There's not much room for continuity and diversity. So I know I'm running out of time now because Rich is looking at his watch. So I'm going to go quickly through these because really, just to conclude, is that my time up?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Well, shall I just leave the end slide on there? And I really just wanted to think about how we can, as archaeologists, start to influence what we're saying to children and what messages we might be giving to them. So I'll let you read that. Okay, cool.